Hi guys, tonight we step quietly into a night that does not want you here. You are lying awake in the American West in 1880 and the dark outside is not empty, it is moving. Wind presses against the walls like something testing for weakness. Snow hisses across the ground, fine and sharp, finding every crack. You can smell cold timber and damp wool. The air tastes thin and metallic. Somewhere nearby, a loose board taps in a steady rhythm, not loud, just persistent enough to keep you from drifting off. You pull a blanket closer and feel how little it weighs against the sound of the storm. You probably will not survive this if you treat it like a normal night. That is the unspoken truth people learned fast out here. Sleep is not rest. It is a strategy. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you're settling in, tell me where you're listening from and what time it is for you right now. Now dim the lights and stay with the breath as the story begins. You are not in a town with brick walls and chimneys. You're in a cabin or a sod house or maybe a dugout pressed into the earth. The storm came faster than expected. One moment the sky was grey and watchful. The next it was erased. This is one of those sudden plains blizzards that newspapers later struggle to describe without exaggeration. A well-established historical fact is that winter storms in the late 19th century, Great Plains could drop temperatures dozens of degrees in hours, catching travellers and settlers completely off guard. People called them whiteouts long before the term became official. Inside the light is low. A small fire glows rather than burns. You have learned not to let it roar. Fuel is precious and sparks are dangerous. The smell of smoke mixes with damp leather and the faint sourness of animals nearby. If you listen closely, you can hear the wind changing pitch as if circling the structure, trying different angles. You lie on a narrow bed or a pile of bedding laid directly on the floor. Straw rustles softly beneath you. It pricks through the fabric, never letting you forget it is there. On top are quilts stitched from scraps coats, meant for riding, and maybe a buffalo robe, if you're lucky or connected. Each layer traps a little more warmth, and you notice how your body responds to even small adjustments. A hand tucked under an arm, knees drawn closer, breath slowed on purpose. Breathing matters now. You draw air in through your nose, letting it warm before it reaches your chest. Exhaling too fast makes the cold feel sharper. You learn this quickly. Children learn it quicker. The sound of your own breath becomes something to monitor, like a signal that tells you how well you're doing. Outside, the world is gone. Snow fills the air so completely that distance has no meaning. A quirky detail that shows up in several frontier diaries is that people sometimes tied ropes between buildings so they could find their way back without getting lost 10 steps from home. Tonight, even that would be buried. You imagine the ropes stiff with ice humming faintly under the strain of the wind. Sleep tries to come, but it does not arrive the way it does on a calm night. It comes in cautious waves. You close your eyes and immediately see movement behind your lids. Shadows shaped like drifting snow. You open them again. Better to rest with awareness than to sink too deeply. People learn that heavy sleep in extreme cold could be dangerous, especially if the fire died down or a draft found its way inside. You hear others shifting nearby, a cough that is quickly stifled, the scrape of a boot being nudged closer to the warmth. No one speaks unless necessary. Words cost energy. Silence feels like another layer you pull around yourself. There is a shared understanding in the room, even if no one names it. Everyone is counting the hours until light, knowing that light does not mean safety, just a change in the rules. This storm does not care what time it is. At some point you notice frost forming on the inside of the walls. It looks delicate, almost pretty feathers of white creeping along the grain of the wood. It is easy to forget what that means. It means the inside air is losing its fight against the cold outside. You shift again, pressing closer to the warm centre of the space. People later told stories about these nights, with a strange mix of pride and disbelief. One little-known habit mentioned in letters is that some settlers placed metal objects near the fire like tools or cookware, not to use them but to absorb and slowly release heat into the room after the flames died down. It was not efficient, but it felt like doing something, and that mattered. As you lie there, you think about how much of survival depends on attention. Not bravery, not toughness, just noticing small changes before they become big problems. You listen to the wind again. It has shifted, slightly lower, now heavier. Snow is piling somewhere. You can feel it in the pressure against the walls. There has always been discussion among historians about whether people in these conditions slept in the way we think of sleep at all, or if they hovered in a half-awake state for hours, slipping in and out of rest, as conditions allowed. The accounts vary. Some describe long stretches of stillness. Others describe constant waking, checking, adjusting. You do not know which version you're living yet. All you know is that you are still breathing, still warm enough, still here. For now, that is enough. You let your eyes close again, not surrendering, just easing. The storm continues its work outside, patient and loud, while inside you practice the quiet skill of staying alive through the night. You wake again without knowing how long you have slept. Time does not behave normally in a storm like this. The darkness feels thick, almost padded, and the wind has settled into a deeper, steadier roar. It no longer shrieks, it leans. You sense pressure against the walls, not violent but constant, as if the blizzard has decided to stay a while. The structure around you matters more now than comfort ever did. You become acutely aware of the walls, their texture, their weaknesses. If you are in a wooden cabin, the boards were cut quickly, sometimes green, sometimes warped. Gaps were filled with mud rags or newspaper. If you are in a sod house, the walls are thick but damp, carrying the earthy smell of frozen soil and grass roots. Canvas roofs sag under weight. Dugouts feel safer, at first pressed into the ground, but they bring their own problems. Moisture creeping in, cold rising from below. A commonly accepted historical detail is that many frontier homes were built fast rather than well. Survival demanded shelter immediately, not perfection. People intended to improve, later assuming later would arrive. Nights like this tested those assumptions without mercy. You listen for drafts. They announce themselves with a thin whistle or a sudden cold touch on your cheek. You adjust instinctively, turning your body so your back blocks the worst of it. A coat is pushed into a crack. A blanket is folded and wedged low along the wall. These small actions feel urgent, even though they look insignificant in the dim light. The wind changes again, and the whole structure answers. The walls creak. Nails complain softly. In sod houses the sound is different, a muted groan like the earth itself shifting its weight. You learn these sounds over time. Each home has a voice. Tonight you're listening for panic in its signs that something is giving way. You remember stories passed around during calmer seasons. Tales of roofs lifted clean off. Of doors frozen shut so completely they had to be chopped free days later. One odd but recorded habit was that some settlers slept with an axe or shovel within arm's reach, not for defence but in case they needed to dig themselves out before daylight. It sounds dramatic until you're lying here counting the seconds between gusts. Your fire has dropped lower. You can tell without looking by the way the room cools at the edges. Heat pulls inward, clinging close to bodies. You debate feeding it more wood. Too much and you risk sparks or running out before morning. Too little and the cold creeps faster than sleep can hide from it. This constant calculation becomes second nature on the frontier. Comfort is never free. The smell of smoke fades and returns in cycles as the fire breathes. It mixes with the scent of wool and leather, with the faint sweetness of straw. These smells become grounding. As long as you can smell them, you know you're still conscious, still present. You shift again, careful not to wake anyone else. Bodies nearby radiate warmth in uneven waves. Someone mutters in their sleep, a low sound swallowed quickly by the wind. No one answers. There is an unspoken agreement to conserve energy, even emotional energy. From outside comes a dull thud, then another. Snow piling against the walls. It does not sound threatening at first. Snow seems soft, but you know better. Packed snow can become a barrier, a weight, even a seal that traps cold inside and air outside. People later wrote about waking to complete silence after storms, not realizing at first that it was because snow had smothered every opening. There is still debate among scholars about whether sod houses were actually warmer than wooden cabins in extreme cold, or if the perceived warmth came from reduced wind rather than higher interior temperatures. The evidence is mixed. Diaries contradict each other. What matters to you now is not the theory, but the feeling. You are warm enough for the moment. Sleep comes back in short stretches. You drift then surface. Each time you reorient yourself by sound and sensation. The wind is still there. The walls are still holding. Your breath still fogs faintly in front of you. You take that as permission to rest a little longer. This is not sleep the way modern life understands it. It is a series of negotiated truces with the night. You allow yourself to loosen, but not to let go completely. Somewhere deep down, you know that attention is the thin line between waking up and not. You settle again, pressing your shoulder into the mattress of straw, feeling the roughness, the reality of it. The storm continues its patient work outside. Inside, the walls stand between you and something far worse, and for now, that is enough. You become aware of the cold, not as a single sensation, but as many small messages arriving at once. Your toes speak first, even inside wool socks and heavy boots. Your fingers follow stiff and slow, to respond when you flex them slightly under the blankets. The air brushing your face feels sharper now, cleaner somehow, like it has been strained of anything soft. This is when you understand that cold is not passive. It does not simply sit there. It watches weights tests. You sense it probing for carelessness. A gap left uncovered. A limb stretched too far from shared warmth. A moment of deep sleep when your breathing slows too much. People on the frontier learned quickly that coal behaved almost like a thinking thing, patient and opportunistic. A widely accepted historical reality is that hypothermia was poorly understood in the 19th century, even though its effects were experienced regularly. People described it in terms of weakness, sleepiness, or a strange calm that felt like relief. They did not have the word, but they knew the danger. That is why you keep shifting, even when your body wants stillness. You pull your knees closer to your chest, curling slightly. It is not comfortable, but it is effective. You feel warmth gather in the hollow of your body, trapped and held. Your breathing becomes slower, more deliberate. In through the nose, out through the nose. Each breath feels like an act of maintenance. The fire has dropped to a quiet glow. You can tell because the light on the wall is duller, barely moving. Shadows stop dancing and settle into place. This is often the coldest part of the night, when fuel is low, and the storm outside has fully claimed the land. You weigh the decision again. Do you feed the fire now, or wait? You decide to wait a little longer. Let the others rest. Let the heat hold. You notice sounds differently now. Every noise seems closer, sharper. A mouse or something like it scratches briefly in the wall. Wood contracts with a small sudden crack that makes you tense, then relax when nothing follows. The wind presses snow against the door, and the sound is soft but heavy, like someone leaning their shoulder there. There is a lesser-known detail mentioned in a few frontier journals, where people described hanging blankets or extra hides directly on the walls during extreme cold, not for privacy, but to create dead air space. It was a simple form of insulation, learned through trial and discomfort, rather than design. You see something similar here, fabric dark against the boards, edges fluttering faintly with each gust. Sleep tries again. This time it is heavier. Your thoughts slow stretch. You imagine warmth in exaggerated ways. Summer dust, sun on skin, the smell of grass. This mental wandering is pleasant, but you do not let it carry you too far. You tug yourself back with a small movement, a shift of the foot, a roll of the shoulder. People later argued about whether staying slightly awake was truly safer, or if exhaustion made that impossible after days of labour and travel. Historians still argue whether the fragmented sleep described in many diaries was a deliberate survival tactic, or simply the result of discomfort and noise. The truth probably sits somewhere in between, shaped by individual bodies and circumstances. You feel thirst now faint but present. Cold air dries everything. You reach for a cup kept near the bed, careful not to spill. The water is cold enough to make your teeth ache, but it feels grounding. You swallow slowly, then tuck the cup back where it will not freeze solid before morning. The room smells different again. Less smoke, more cold. There is a clean, almost sterile edge to it. You pull the blanket higher, brushing it against your cheek. The fabric is rough, familiar. It anchors you in the present. Somewhere nearby, someone sighs in their sleep. Not a sound of distress, just a release. You take it as a good sign. Shared nights like this build a quiet awareness of others without conversation. You sense their warmth, their movements, their breathing patterns. It becomes part of the environment, like the walls or the fire. Outside, the storm does not lessen. If anything, it feels more settled, as if it has found its rhythm. You stop expecting it to end soon. Acceptance brings a strange calm. You are here. The night is long. You will meet it one careful moment at a time. You let your eyes close again, not forcing sleep, just allowing rest. The cold remains alert, so do you. Between the two, a fragile balance holds, and for now, it is enough to carry you deeper into the night. You reach a point in the night where comfort stops being the goal. Warmth becomes the only measure that matters. Everything you arrange beneath and over your body now is chosen with that single purpose in mind. The bedding beneath you is uneven, layered more by instinct than symmetry. Straw first pressed flat where it has already learned the shape of sleepers before you. Then a thin mattress, if one exists at all, stuffed with corn husks, or more straw shifting softly when you move. On top come the layers that truly matter, quilts pieced together from old clothing, coats that once faced open wind on horseback, blankets heavy with use and scent. You pull them close, testing their reach, making sure no part of you is left exposed. Even a small strip of skin can become a problem by morning. People living on the western frontier understood something very clearly, even if they never phrased it scientifically. Insulation mattered more than softness. Contemporary accounts describe families sleeping fully dressed, wrapped in whatever fabrics they owned, sometimes piling so many layers on top that movement became difficult. That weight uncomfortable, as it was trapped heat better than any single thick covering could. You adjust again, tucking fabric under your shoulders, under your calves, under your feet. Feet are important. If they grow too cold, the rest of the body seems to follow. You keep your boots on loosened just enough to allow circulation. It feels wrong at first. Modern instincts want shoes off at bedtime. Out here, boots are part of the bedding. There is an unusual detail mentioned in some letters written years later, when settlers reflected on early winters. A few recalled stuffing spare clothing between blankets, rather than wearing it, creating pockets of still air that held warmth longer. It was not elegant, it was effective. You notice something similar here. A folded shirt pressed against your lower back, a scarf laid across ankles like a small barrier against creeping cold. The smell of the bedding is strong when you shift. Wool, leather, sweat, smoke. None of it unpleasant, just very real. These smells mean survival. Cleanliness in the modern sense is not the priority tonight. Staying warm is. You lie still for a while, letting the heat build. It takes time. Warmth does not arrive instantly. It accumulates slowly, like snow itself, layer by layer. You can feel it pooling around your core, faint at first, then steadier. Your breathing slows without you forcing it now, following the rhythm of that warmth. Nearby, someone pulls a blanket tighter the fabric, whispering briefly. Another body shifts closer. There is no discussion. Nights like this remove hesitation. Shared warmth is accepted without embarrassment or apology. It is understood as practical. Later researchers have never fully agreed on how effective these improvised bedding systems were compared to modern sleeping arrangements. Some argue the constant drafts and cold floors cancelled out much of the benefit. Others point to survival rates and first-hand descriptions that suggest these layered systems worked well enough when combined with vigilance. Lying here, you are not interested in the argument. You are interested in whether your toes feel less sharp with cold than they did a few minutes ago. They do. You test your hands, neck sliding one out briefly, then tucking it back in. The difference is noticeable. That small success brings a quiet sense of relief, not joy, just reassurance. Outside, the storm continues, but you notice it less now. The bedding creates a kind of private interior space, a softer world inside the larger one. Sound dulls slightly. The wind becomes background rather than threat. Your body relaxes into the arrangement you have made. You commit to it knowing that changing everything again will cost heat. This is your position for the next stretch of night. You settle into it, carefully minimizing movement, letting the layers do their work. Sleep edges closer again. Not deep, not careless, just enough to rest muscles and calm the mind. You accept it cautiously, wrapped in straw wool, and borrowed warmth, trusting that for now, what you have built will hold. The fire has become a quiet presence rather than a spectacle. It no longer throws long shadows or crackles loudly. Instead, it glows a low red center, surrounded by grey ash, breathing slowly, like something alive but tired. You can feel its influence, even with your eyes closed. When the warmth fades slightly, you notice at once. Managing that fire is an art learned through nights exactly like this. Not by reading instructions, but by watching what happens when you add too much or too little. Settlers in the 1880s often relied on small enclosed stoves or crude fireplaces that leaked as much heat as they produced. Still, they were lifelines. Records from the period show that fuel shortages in winter could be more dangerous than storms themselves. You debate whether to rise and feed it. Standing up means exposing your body to colder air. Heat escapes fast when you move. At the same time, letting the fire die too low invites the cold to reclaim the room. You wait, listening to the wind timing your decision between gusts. Finally you move, slowly, carefully. You peel yourself out of the layered warmth and immediately feel the difference. The air bites at your face and hands. You step lightly, boots thudding softly on the floor. Kneeling near the hearth, you add a single piece of wood, then another smaller one on top. Not too much, just enough. A spark jumps brief and bright, then disappears. You watch closely until the flames settle. Too many fires ended badly because someone walked away too soon. This was common knowledge even then. Frontier newspapers frequently warned about cabin fires, especially during storms when chimneys drew unpredictably. You back away, returning to the bedding, bringing a faint scent of fresh smoke with you. It clings to your clothes, sharp and reassuring. You pull the blankets back into place, sealing in what warmth you can. One little mentioned habit from this era involves people banking their fires before sleep, covering embers with ash so they would last longer through the night. It reduced heat output but extended survival time. You suspect the fire here was prepared that way earlier. The glow is steady, restrained. As you lie down again, you notice how your body reacts to the returning warmth. Muscles loosen slightly. The tightness in your jaw eases. Your breath deepens on its own. Heat does not just warm skin, it changes thought, mood, patience. The sounds of the fire blend with the storm now. Wind outside, soft hiss of embers inside. They overlap, creating a strange balance. Inside noise counters outside noise. It keeps your mind from focusing too sharply on either. There has long been disagreement among historians about how warm these interiors truly were during extreme blizzards. Some temperature estimates suggest conditions barely above freezing inside many cabins. Others argue that proximity to fire and bodies created microclimates that felt warmer than measurements suggest. Lying here wrapped and alert, you understand both sides. Warmth is not uniform. It moves. Your eyes grow heavier again. The fire's glow flickers faintly against the wall, a dull red pulse. You open your eyes just long enough to confirm it is still there, still alive. Then you close them again, trusting it to hold for a while. You shift once more, minimal movement, careful not to disturb the fragile balance you've built. The storm remains relentless, but inside the fire has been negotiated with, reduced to a manageable companion rather than a threat. Sleep returns in shallow layers, not dreams yet, just rest. You float there between awareness and release, listening to the soft language of heat and wind, letting the night continue around you. Your breathing becomes something you actively notice now, not out of anxiety, but out of habit. In cold like this, breath tells you more than sight ever could. Each exhale leaves your mouth and nose as a faint cloud briefly visible, even in the low light, then gone. The size of that cloud matters. When it grows thicker, you know the room has cooled again. When it thins, warmth has returned, at least a little. People living through frontier winters learned early to read these signals. Accounts from the period often mention watching breath indoors as a quiet gauge of conditions. Frost forming on eyelashes or eyebrows was taken seriously even inside. It meant something had shifted, and not in your favour. You draw air in slowly through your nose, letting it warm along the way. Breathing through the mouth feels harsher, sharper, like it pulls heat straight out of you. Children were taught this without explanation. They learned by imitation, by correction. by the sting of doing it wrong once and never forgetting. The room is still but not silent. The fire murmurs softly. Somewhere near the wall, snow slides down in small avalanches, brushing against the structure with a sound like sand. Each noise registers more clearly because your body has grown still. You notice that your breathing has slowed too much at one point. It happens subtly. The cold encourages it, coaxing the body towards stillness. You shift just enough to reset yourself. A shoulder rolls. A knee straightens and curls again. Breathing deepens. You stay alert. One lesser-known practice mentioned in scattered journals describes people humming quietly to themselves during extreme cold nights, not to pass time, but to ensure they were still awake enough to regulate breath and circulation. You do not hum, but you count silently for a few breaths, keeping rhythm, keeping warmth moving. The air smells sharper now, cleaner than before. Smoke has thinned. Cold has a smell of its own, something dry and metallic. You press your face briefly into a blanket, breathing in wool and smoke instead. It is warmer there. It feels safer. There is no consensus among modern researchers about how much conscious breath control actually helped prevent cold-related sleep dangers in these conditions. Some argue that awareness mattered less than insulation and fire. Others believe vigilance itself saved lives, especially during long nights when exhaustion tempted people to surrender completely to sleep. From where you lie, the distinction feels meaningless. You do what feels necessary. Nearby, another person shifts and exhales sharply, then settles again. Their breath fogs faintly in the dark. You register it, comforted by the confirmation that others are still alert in their own quiet ways. Your chest rises and falls steadily now. In, out, slow, measured. Each breath feels like a small promise that you're still present, still choosing to stay warm. The storm outside continues to push and scrape. Inside, the air holds. You let your eyes close again, keeping your breath as the last thing you pay attention to before rest takes over once more. As the night deepens, sound begins to behave differently. What was once background becomes immediate. Every small noise feels closer, sharper, as if the storm has stripped away distance itself. You hear the cabin respond to pressure in subtle ways. A low groan as wind leans hard against one side. A faint rattle where something loose has never quite been fixed. Even the snow has a voice now, brushing and piling, whispering as it climbs. You lie still, letting your ears do the work your eyes cannot. Darkness hides details, but sound maps the space around you. The fire shifts softly, embers settling with a muted sigh. Somewhere near the wall, something scurries briefly, then stops. You do not wonder what it is. You only note that it is alive and moving and therefore warm. People who lived through winters like this often described how nighttime noises multiplied during storms. Letters and recollections suggest that the absence of normal outdoor sounds made every interior creak feel louder, more intentional. Wind erased the usual markers of safety. No distant animals, no rustling trees, just pressure and response. You listen to the wind change tone again. It drops lower, heavier, as if carrying weight. That usually means snow is building fast. You imagine drifts stacking against the walls, reshaping the world inch by inch. Somewhere out there, fences are vanishing. Paths are gone. The land you knew yesterday has been edited without asking. A small pop from the fire makes your muscles tense, then release. You count these reactions, now measuring your own alertness. Too jumpy and you waste energy. Too dull and you miss warning signs. Balance matters. There is a detail that surfaces occasionally in frontier memoirs easy to overlook. Some people mentioned learning the specific voices of their homes during storms. They could tell by sound alone whether snow was hitting the roof, sliding off, or beginning to settle in dangerous weight. Lying here, you realize you're doing the same thing without trying. The sounds are becoming familiar. Someone near you coughs softly, then presses their face deeper into fabric. You feel the vibration more than hear it. Bodies share sound as much as warmth. Every breath, every shift confirms that the group is still intact. The storm pushes harder for a while. The walls answer. Nails complain. Wood tightens, then relaxes. In a sod house, the noise would be duller earth, absorbing some of the violence. In a wooden cabin, it feels more personal, like the structure is being tested piece by piece. You remind yourself that this has happened before, that it held then, that it is likely to hold now. Later interpretation has never fully settled whether these constant nighttime noises increased fear or reduced it over time. Some accounts suggest people grew accustomed, even comforted, by the predictable rhythm of sound. Others describe heightened anxiety nights, spent counting cracks and groans until exhaustion took over. You suspect the answer depends on the person and the night. You shift slightly, careful not to disturb the warmth you have built. The blanket brushes your ear, muffling sound on one side. You turn your head the other way, letting noise back in. Total silence would feel worse than this. Outside, something thuds against the wall, then slides down slowly. Snow. You picture it pressing higher now, narrowing the space between you and the world beyond. The idea is both unsettling and oddly reassuring. Snow blocks wind as much as it delivers it. Buried walls can mean warmer interiors, at least temporarily. Your breathing stays steady as you listen. In, out, slow. Each sound becomes part of a pattern rather than a threat. Wind surge, wall answer, fire sigh. Someone nearby shifts. Repeat. You realize you have not thought about tomorrow in a while. The storm has pulled your attention completely into the present. That is its power. It erases plans. It shrinks life down to what you can manage right now. Warmth, breath, shelter. Sleep creeps closer again, not suddenly, but like a tide inching up a dark shore. You let it come in pieces. A few minutes of drifting. A surface return when sound changes, then back again. The night continues its long conversation with the cabin. You listen without trying to solve it, trusting your senses to wake you if something truly changes. For now, everything that should be moving is moving. Everything that should be holding is holding. Wrapped in layered warmth, surrounded by familiar sounds, you let your awareness soften just enough to rest, staying lightly tethered to the world by windward and breath. You never undress completely. That idea belongs to calmer places. Tonight clothing is part of your insulation, part of your bedding, part of your plan. You sleep in layers that would feel excessive anywhere else. Shirt, vest, coat, trousers tucked into socks, socks tucked into boots. A hat pulled low covering ears that sting quickly when left exposed. This is not accidental. People who lived through plains winters learned early that removing clothes at night often meant struggling to get them back on in the morning, when fabric stiffened with cold and fingers lost their dexterity. Many personal accounts mention sleeping exactly as they worked dressed for the outdoors, even when lying down. Comfort mattered less than readiness. You test your boots by flexing your toes inside them. They are not tight, but they are not loose either. Circulation is something you think about now in ways you never had before. Too tight and blood slows. Too loose and cold air creeps in. You find the middle ground and stay there. The hat stays on. That surprises newcomers most. Modern advice insists on bare heads at bedtime. Out here, uncovered ears burn first. You feel the wool against your skin, scratchy but effective. A scarf or neckerchief is tucked around your neck, blocking the draft that sneaks down the collar. That narrow strip of skin feels more vulnerable than the rest of you combined. One small practice noted in a handful of frontier letters describes people stuffing spare socks or cloth into their boots before sleeping, not to wear, but to reduce empty space where cold air could settle. You notice something similar near your feet now. A rolled piece of fabric pressed against your ankles, keeping warmth closer. You lie still, letting your body adjust to sleeping dressed. It takes a moment. Fabric creases where it usually would not. Buttons press lightly. Seams remind you they exist. After a while, your body stops protesting. Survival overrides preference. Nearby, you hear someone tug a coat tighter, the sound muted but familiar. No one comments. There's no sense of embarrassment about sleep in this way. Nights like this erase those boundaries quickly. Everyone understands the purpose. The fire continues to glow faintly, not strong enough to warm the entire room, but enough to create a center. Heat clings to clothing closest to it. You feel one side of your body warmer than the other, and adjust slightly, redistributing that warmth across your back. It was widely recognized among settlers that falling asleep without sufficient layers was dangerous even indoors during severe storms. Several recorded tragedies mention people who lay down briefly to rest, underestimating how quickly cold could overtake them. Those stories travelled fast, shared quietly, but remembered clearly. You check your hands next, sliding one free for a moment. The air feels sharp against your skin. You tuck it back in quickly, rubbing fingers together to keep them responsive. Gloves stay on or within reach. Bare hands feel vulnerable here, like exposed thoughts. Your breathing stays slow and controlled. You notice how the layers around your chest change the sound of each breath, slightly muffled, softer. That sound is reassuring. It tells you that fabric is doing its job. There has never been a clear consensus among historians about whether sleeping fully dressed actually increased survival rates or simply reflected fear and caution. Some suggest it was mostly psychological. Others argue it added crucial insulation during fire lulls and sudden drafts. You are not interested in resolving that question tonight. You are interested in the fact that you feel warmer dressed than you would undressed. Outside, the storm continues to press. Inside, the room feels smaller now, filled with layers of fabric and breath. Space is shared carefully. Someone shifts closer without touching, adjusting to the shape of warmth rather than claiming it. You settle again, finding the least restrictive position. On your side, knees bent slightly, arms tucked close. Lying flat lets cold creep along the back. Curling holds heat. You choose curl. The night stretches on. Time loses definition. You wake briefly when the wind surges, then drift again when it eases. Each return to awareness begins with the same inventory. Warmth present, breath steady, fire still alive, walls still holding. Clothing rustles softly when you move. It is a constant reminder that you're not at rest in the modern sense. You're paused, waiting, holding your place against the cold. Eventually, sleep deepens a little. Not enough to forget where you are, but enough to ease muscles and quiet thoughts. You remain dressed, layered, ready, letting the night carry you forward, one careful breath at a time. Warmth is no longer something you create alone. At some point in the night, it becomes shared, negotiated quietly, through proximity rather than words. Bodies shift closer, not touching at first, just aligning so heat can travel. You feel it as a gentle change in the air, a softening near your back, a faint rise in temperature along your legs. This is one of those adjustments that happens without discussion. Frontier households understood the value of shared warmth instinctively. Family members slept close. Travelers were offered space near others on the coldest nights. Separation was a luxury reserved for milder seasons. In winter storms like this, closeness became practical rather than personal. You sense someone nearby, turning slightly careful not to wake you fully. A blanket edge moves, brushing your sleeve. The fabric settles again, sealing in heat. No apology follows. None is needed. Everyone here understands the rules of the night. You notice how warmth behaves differently when shared. It does not arrive suddenly. It spreads slowly, unevenly, following the contours of bodies and bedding. One shoulder warms before the other. Your calves feel it last. You shift subtly to help it along, aligning yourself with the source rather than fighting it. An overlooked detail in several personal accounts describes people arranging themselves deliberately before sleep, deciding who lay where based on age, health, and endurance. Children were placed toward the center. The elderly were shielded from drafts. Stronger adults took the colder edges. These decisions were rarely spoken aloud. They were assumed. You become aware of breathing patterns around you. Someone exhales slowly, steadily. Another breath catches briefly, then smooths out. These sounds blend into a low rhythm, almost like the room itself is breathing. It is calming in a way you did not expect. You feel the weight of another blanket added somewhere above you. It presses down, gently increasing warmth without crushing. The sensation is grounding. Heavier bedding often worked better than lighter coverings, trapping heat by limiting air movement. People learned this through repetition, not instruction. There is no final agreement among later analysts about how effective shared sleeping truly was in preventing cold-related illness. Some suggest its benefit was mostly emotional, reducing fear and isolation. Others point to basic physics and body heat exchange as undeniable contributors to survival. Lying here, you experience both at once. Warmth and reassurance arrive together. The storm outside continues, but it feels farther away now. The room has narrowed into this small circle of shared heat and quiet awareness. Wind still presses. Snow still builds. Inside, bodies respond by drawing closer, holding space together. You become careful with movement. Too much shifting disrupts the balance. You adjust only when necessary, making small changes rather than large ones. A foot tucked closer, a shoulder angled slightly. Each movement is deliberate, respectful of the warmth others provide. At some point you notice that your own body has become a source of heat for someone else. You feel it in the way they lean just close enough to benefit without fully touching. The responsibility registers quietly. You stay still, letting warmth pass through you rather than pulling away. This shared arrangement requires trust. Trust that no one will move suddenly. Trust that the fire will hold. Trust that the walls will stand. Nights like this build bonds that last beyond the storm, even if they are never discussed later. Sleep comes more easily now, cushioned by layered fabric and nearby warmth. It is still light, still breakable, but it stretches longer between waking moments. When you do surface, it is to check the same things again. Breath, heat, sound. Everything remains as it should. The group holds. The night moves on. You let yourself drift again, aware of others beside you, sharing space and warmth as naturally as breathing. In this small pocket of shelter, survival becomes a collective act, quiet and steady, carried forward together until morning finds its way back. Fear does not announce itself loudly here. It does not rush in all at once. Instead, it settles quietly, like the cold itself, seeping into thoughts when you're tired enough to let it. You notice it most when everything else goes still, when the wind pauses for half a breath, when the fire stops murmuring, when the room feels too quiet to be safe. You recognize the feeling and narrow your attention deliberately. Panic wastes warmth. It tightens muscles, speeds. Breathing pulls heat away from where it is needed most. People who survived nights like this learned that managing fear was as important as managing fuel or bedding. Calm was not a personality trait, it was a practiced skill. You focus on simple routines. Count your breaths again. Adjust a blanket edge. Press your feet together. These small actions give your mind something solid to hold. They remind you that you're still in control of something, even if the storm outside refuses to listen. Someone nearby stirs and whispers, a few words barely audible. Not a conversation. Just a sound meant to reassure perhaps even themselves. You do not reply, but you register it. You are not alone in this vigilance. That knowledge eases the tightness in your chest. People later described how fear behaves strangely during extreme weather. Some recalled moments of sharp clarity where every detail felt vivid and manageable. Others remembered a dull heaviness, an urge to give in to stillness. Both responses show up in letters and recollections, often from the same person, describing different nights. Memory does not settle on one version. You feel your thoughts drift toward worst-case images. Roof giving way, fire dying completely, snow sealing the door. You stop that line of thinking gently, without scolding yourself. You replace it with observation instead. The roof is still intact. The fire still glows. The door is buried, perhaps, but it is still there. You bring your mind back to what is real right now. There was a quiet understanding among frontier families that talking about fear during the night made it stronger. Many accounts mention that reassurance came through action rather than words. A hand tightening a blanket, someone rising to check the fire without being asked. Silence was not denial, it was containment. You notice how your body responds as fear loosens its grip. Shoulders drop, jaw unclenches, breathing slows again. Heat settles more evenly through your chest and abdomen. Calm restores circulation in a way force never could. Outside, the storm surges again, as if testing your resolve. Wind scrapes along the walls harder now. Snow thumps against the structure, then slides down in sheets. You feel a flicker of alarm, then let it pass. The walls answer back with their familiar creaks. They have not changed their voice. That consistency matters. Some later observers questioned whether the emotional discipline described in frontier stories was exaggerated by nostalgia. Others point out that such restraint was often learned through loss and necessity rather than romantic idealism. Whatever the truth, you feel its effect now. Staying steady keeps you warmer than fear ever could. You adjust your position slightly, careful not to disrupt shared warmth. A small shift of the hips, a deeper tuck of the chin. These movements feel purposeful grounding. You are not waiting helplessly. You are participating in your own survival. The night continues long and demanding, but your mind no longer races ahead of it. You meet it where it is, moment by moment. Wind, breath, warmth, sound. Sleep returns again, thin but serviceable. When fear brushes close, it finds no open door. You have filled the space with routine awareness and quiet resolve. Wrapped in shared warmth, you let yourself rest again, carrying vigilance, lightly rather than letting it weigh you down. At some point you realize the outside world has disappeared completely, not just from sight, but from usefulness. Roads no longer exist. Fence lines mean nothing. Distance has been erased by snow and wind until only the immediate matters. Inside this small shelter, time stretches and compresses in unfamiliar ways. Snow has been building for hours now. You can feel it in the way sound changes. Wind no longer strikes the walls directly. It arrives muffled, softened, as if something thick is leaning against the structure. Drifts are climbing. The cabin is being wrapped from the outside layer by layer. People who lived through plains, blizzards often remarked on this moment later. The realization that the storm had sealed them in whether they wanted it or not. Once snow packed tightly against walls and doors, movement outside became impossible without digging. This happened more often than newcomers expected. Weather here did not negotiate. You imagine the door now, buried halfway up, maybe more. Hinges stiff with ice. Any attempt to open it before the storm passes would mean fighting weight and cold at the same time. That thought does not alarm you as much as it might have earlier. It simply becomes another fact to carry. Inside the room feels smaller, not because walls have moved, but because attention has narrowed. The outside no longer offers options. Everything that matters is already here. Fire, bodies, breath, bedding. You listen for changes. Snow settling has a different sound than snow striking. It presses. It sighs. Occasionally, there is a dull thump as a larger mass slides down and settles again. Each one tells you how fast the world is reshaping itself. A few settlers later mentioned an odd sense of safety once snow fully surrounded a building. Wind lost some of its force. Drafts eased. Interiors could feel slightly warmer, sealed by nature itself. That did not last forever. But for a time, snow acted like insulation rather than threat. You sense that now. The air feels steadier, less sharp. You adjust the blanket around your shoulders and notice that the cold is no longer creeping quite as aggressively along the floor. The change is subtle but real. You take it as a small advantage and settle into it. Sleep comes and goes in longer stretches now. When you wake, it is not from panic but from habit. You check the same things each time. Fire, breath, sound, all remain steady. Someone near you shifts and exhales slowly, deeply, then stills. You recognize the sound of someone entering a deeper rest. You let that knowledge calm you further. Shared vigilance does not require everyone to be awake at once. There has never been a single agreed explanation for why some people felt calmer once storms sealed them in, while others felt trapped. Accounts contradict each other. Perhaps it depended on trust in shelter, perhaps on experience, perhaps on how many winters someone had already endured. Lying here, you feel more grounded than afraid. The storm continues, but it has settled into a pattern. You stop waiting for sudden change. That expectation relaxes something in you. Muscles soften, thoughts slow, breathing deepens without effort. You pull the blanket closer around your neck and feel warmth hold. The smell of wool and smoke lingers steady and familiar. Snow presses quietly outside, shaping the night into something contained. For now the world has been reduced to this small sealed space, and within it, everything that must hold is holding. You allow yourself to rest again, trusting the walls, the snow, and the quiet rhythm of shared survival to carry you forward until the storm loosens its grip. The animals are closer now. You notice them not by sight but by warmth and smell, and the subtle sounds they make when they shift their weight. Livestock was never far from shelter on nights like this. Horses, cattle, sometimes even chickens were kept as near as possible, separated by little more than a wall, a door, or a shared roof. People living on the frontier understood that animals were more than property. They were heat sources, weather alarms, and living indicators of danger. When animals grew restless, something was wrong. When they settled, breathing slow and heavy, it meant conditions had stabilized, at least for the moment. You catch the low sound of a horse shifting its stance, a soft stamp of a hoof, the muted snort of breath forced through flared nostrils. That warm breath rises and falls steadily, adding to the invisible warmth pressed into the air around the structure. Even through walls, it makes a difference. The smell reaches you next. Hay, manure, animal hide. It is strong, but it is not unpleasant. It means life. It means warmth that does not go out when the fire burns low. Many settlers later admitted that sharing space with animals during storms was uncomfortable, but they also credited it with saving lives more than once. You remember hearing that cattle sometimes froze standing up during the worst blizzards, their bodies locked in place by ice and exhaustion. That knowledge sits quietly in your mind, not as panic but as context. Animals are vulnerable too. Keeping them close is as much about their survival as yours. A small, easily overlooked practice appears in some homestead recollections. Families sometimes chose sleeping spots based on which wall bordered the barn or animal enclosure. That side of the house stayed warmer through the night. You realize now that your position is no accident. The wall at your back radiates a faint, steady warmth that does not come from fire. You shift slightly, pressing closer to it, careful not to disrupt others. The warmth is subtle, but it holds. It feels different than fire heat, less sharp, more constant. Animals respond to storms in their own ways. Horses lower their heads. Cattle cluster together. Chickens tuck in tight, barely moving. These behaviours were watched closely by people who depended on them. Tonight their stillness is reassuring. There is some uncertainty among modern interpreters about how much warmth animals actually contributed to interior spaces during extreme cold. Estimates vary widely. Some suggest the effect was minimal. Others argue it created crucial pockets of heat that kept temperatures just high enough to matter. What cannot be disputed is that people believed in the benefit strongly enough to plan around it. You hear a long, slow exhale from the other side of the wall. It is almost like a sigh. The sound blends with the wind, softening it. The storm no longer feels as loud as aggressive. It feels buffered. Your body responds to this change. Muscles loosen slightly. Your shoulders sink deeper into bedding. Breathing becomes heavier, more even. Warmth builds where it can, helped along by bodies human and animal alike. Sleep settles in more confidently now. You still surface now and then, checking in with your senses, but the intervals between waking stretch longer. When you do wake, it is to familiar sounds. Fire, wind, animals shifting, all in balance. You allow yourself to trust that balance for a while. The storm has not gone away, but it has been met on multiple fronts. Walls, fire, bodies, animals. Together, they form a system that holds. Wrapped in layered warmth, with steady breath nearby on both sides of the walls, you drift again, letting the shared heat of living creatures carry you deeper into rest as the blizzard continues its long work outside. Hunger arrives quietly, not as a sharp demand, but as a dull pull somewhere deep in your body. You notice it when your thoughts wander, or when warmth feels harder to hold. Food matters here even at night, especially at night. The body burns fuel faster in cold, turning calories into heat without asking permission. You think back to the last meal you had before the storm closed in. It was not elaborate. Salted meat, bread or biscuits, maybe beans cooked thick and slow. Heavy food chosen because it lasts and because it warms from the inside out. People on the frontier learned that going to sleep hungry in winter was a gamble. Digestion itself creates warmth, a slow internal fire that can mean the difference between waking and not. Someone nearby shifts and reaches for a small bundle kept close. You hear the faint sound of cloth unfolding. A quiet chew follows. The smell reaches you a moment later. Fat and salt. Simple, comforting. No one eats much, just enough to remind the body it has fuel to burn through the long hours ahead. You consider whether to do the same. Your stomach tightens slightly, then relaxes. You decide to take a few bites. Carefully, slowly. Eating too much makes you restless. Eating too little leaves you cold. You find the middle ground again, as you have with everything else tonight. A practice remembered in several homestead accounts involves saving the heartiest foods, specifically for nights of extreme cold, even if that meant simpler meals during the day. People plan for the night, not the morning. That way of thinking feels strange now, but it makes sense here, where survival is measured hour by hour. The food sits warm and heavy in your stomach. You feel its effect gradually, not dramatic. Just a soft return of strength, a steadiness in your core. You breathe a little easier. Water matters too, though you drink sparingly. Cold dulls thirst, but dryness creeps in anyway. A small swallow is enough. You do not want to wake later with ice where liquid should be. Sleep comes easier after eating. Muscles loosen. The body settles into its work, converting what you gave it into warmth. You feel it spreading slowly, like embers catching. Some later observers wondered whether people truly understood this connection between food and nighttime survival, or if they simply followed habit, passed down without explanation. Letters and memories suggest both. Some spoke of it plainly. Others just did what had worked before. Knowledge here was practical, not theoretical. You adjust your position again, mindful of shared warmth. The smell of food fades, replaced once more by wool and smoke. Outside, the storm continues its steady pressure, but inside your body feels better equipped to meet it. Someone nearby exhales deeply, settling into a heavier rest. You follow, letting your breathing slow and deepen. The night stretches on, but it feels more manageable now, less sharp at the edges. You drift again, stomach, warm breath, steady body, supported by layers of fabric and quiet preparation. Food has done its quiet work. The storm can wait. Sleep does not come easily now, and when it does, it arrives with conditions. You learn that stillness can be risky if it lasts too long. The body cools fastest when it stops moving entirely, and so rest is taken in measured pieces rather than surrendered to all at once. You drift surface drift, again never fully letting go. Someone nearby begins to speak softly, not to wake anyone fully, but to keep the edge of awareness alive. A story half remembered, a place described in gentle fragments. The words are slow and uneven, sometimes trailing off before finishing a thought. No one corrects them. Accuracy does not matter, the rhythm does. This was a common way to pass the deepest hours of winter nights. People told stories not for entertainment, but to stay awake just enough. Frontier recollections often mention long nights filled with quiet talk, hymns hummed under breath, or repeated memories shared until dawn. The goal was not joy, it was survival through alertness. You listen without responding, letting the voice anchor you. The sound fills the space that fear might otherwise claim. It gives your mind something warm to hold while your body rests. Your eyes close, but your ears stay open. The storm outside blends with a cadence of speech, wind rising and falling between sentences. At times the voice pauses, and the fire answers instead, a soft crackle, a settling ember. Then the voice returns steady again. There is a small habit remembered in some families where certain stories were reserved for the coldest nights, tales told slowly and often repeated, not because they were special, but because they were familiar enough to be soothing. New stories demanded too much attention. Familiar ones allowed the body to relax without losing awareness. You feel your breathing deepen as the words wash over you. The body rests while the mind stays lightly engaged. This balance is delicate, learned over many nights like this one. Not everyone agreed later on whether these nighttime stories truly helped or simply passed time until exhaustion won. Some accounts describe them as life-saving routines. Others barely mention them at all. Memory shapes these nights differently depending on who survived to tell them. The voice fades eventually, not abruptly, but gently, trailing into silence as the speaker drifts themselves. No one replaces it. The room settles into a shared quiet that feels less dangerous now that it has been earned. You shift slightly enough to remind your muscles that they are still needed. Fingers flex, toes press together, then stillness again. Sleep comes in shallow waves, never pulling you under completely. When you wake, it is without alarm, just a gentle return to awareness. The storm is still there. The fire still glows faintly. The room still holds. You accept this pattern. Rest, wake, listen, rest again. It carries you forward through the longest stretch of night, one soft story at a time, until even silence feels safe enough to sleep beside. Your eyes open slowly, and for a moment you think something has changed. The darkness feels different. Not lighter, not brighter, just altered in a way that makes you uncertain. You look toward where a window should be and see only pale blur, a soft grey pressed hard against the glass. Windows behave strangely in storms like this. Frost feathers across them from the inside, delicate patterns forming and reforming as breath and temperature shift. Snow outside reflects what little light exists, turning night into something that looks like dawn if you do not know better. More than one person has mistaken this glow for morning and risen too soon only to discover the storm was far from finished. You remind yourself not to trust appearances. Light means nothing right now. The rules of day and night have been rewritten by snow. You listen instead. The wind is still present, though its voice has softened. It no longer screams, it presses. That tells you snow has built high enough to blunt its edge. The walls feel steadier, less rattled. You take this as information, not comfort. A small draught brushes your cheek colder than the rest of the room. You trace it back to the window frame, where frost has thickened. Someone has stuffed cloth along the sill, but cold always finds a way. You pull your blanket higher and turn your face slightly away. People living in cabins like this learned quickly that windows were the weakest part of any shelter. Glass was thin and often poorly fitted. Many families covered them entirely during storms using boards, blankets, or even furniture to block drafts. Some later recalled that windows were treated less like sources of light and more like controlled leaks. You notice how the frost patterns distort what little light comes through. Shapes appear where none exist. Movements where there is only drifting snow. Your tired mind tries to interpret it, and you stop that gently. You close your eyes again, choosing sound over sight. There is an old disagreement among those who studied these winters later about how much visual confusion affected people during long storms. Some suggest it heightened anxiety, feeding false hope or fear. Others argue people adapted quickly, learning to distrust what they saw and rely on touch and sound instead. Tonight you are firmly in the second group. You reach out briefly, touching the floor near your bedding. Cold but not biting. That tells you the fire has done its work, even at this low glow. You pull your hand back into warmth and settle again. Nearby, someone shifts and mutters, likely reacting to the same false light. No one gets up. Experience has taught everyone here to wait. Morning will announce itself clearly when it arrives with sound and change, not tricks of reflection. Your breathing steadies again. The room smells faintly of cold glass now, a sharp, clean scent layered beneath wool and smoke. You adjust your position one more time, finding the least exposed angle. The window fades from your thoughts as you let your eyes stay closed. Light or dark, it no longer matters. What matters is warmth, breath, and patience. You have learned to read the night without looking at it. Sleep returns gently, undisturbed by illusion, carrying you forward through the remaining hours until the storm decides to loosen its grip for real. Names drift through your mind without being invited. Faces too. People you knew before this winter. Neighbours who took the same risks, built similar shelters, trusted the same signs. Some of them are not here anymore. You do not picture how they died. That would be too much. Instead, you remember small things. A laugh carried on cold air. A borrowed tool returned late. A wave from a distance. Death was spoken of differently on the frontier. Not hidden, but not lingered over either. People learn to acknowledge loss without letting it dominate the room. Nights like this one made that restraint necessary. Dwelling too long on what could go wrong invited panic. Remembering quietly felt safer. You think of the storms people talked about later, the ones that earned names long after they passed. Winters that changed maps and habits. Blizzards that erased entire herds. Everyone had a story tied to one. Tonight may become one of those stories someday, told softly years from now, when danger feels far away. You feel a tightening in your chest and recognize it for what it is. Not fear exactly, memory. You let it exist without feeding it. You bring your attention back to the present, the blanket against your chin, the steady breath of someone nearby, the faint warmth along the wall where animals shelter. People who survived these winters often mentioned how memory sharpened during storms. Ordinary moments felt heavier, more permanent. Perhaps because the future felt uncertain. Perhaps because the mind searched for anchors. No one ever fully agreed on why that happened. It simply did. You adjust your position slightly, grounding yourself in sensation. The straw beneath you rustles. Wool scratches faintly against your wrist. These small physical reminders pull you out of memory and back into the room. The storm outside continues its work, but it feels less personal now. You are not imagining outcomes. You are just listening. Wind, snow, structure, breath. Someone nearby shifts and whispers a name, then falls silent again. It is not clear if they're dreaming or remembering. You do not ask. You understand the impulse. Loss here is not dramatic. It is folded into daily life, acknowledged in pauses and habits rather than speeches. You carry it quietly the same way you carry cold and fatigue. It does not stop you from resting. It simply exists alongside everything else. Your breathing evens out again. The tightness fades, warmth holds, the room feels steady. Whatever has been lost before tonight does not define what happens next. You let sleep return softer, now less guarded. Memory loosens its grip as your senses settle back into the present. The night continues, and you move with it quietly, patiently, one breath at a time. Small rituals take on weight during a night like this. Not grand gestures, not prayers spoken aloud, but quiet habits repeated because they feel right. You tug the blanket edge a certain way. You touch the same spot on the wall when you shift. You pause for a breath before closing your eyes again. None of it is planned. All of it is deliberate. People who live through repeated winters learn to trust these habits, even if they could not explain them. Some folded blankets in a particular order. Some placed boots facing the door. Some always checked the fire one last time before settling, even if it had just been checked moments before. These actions were not about superstition so much as reassurance. They created a sense of order when the world outside refused to cooperate. You notice your own version forming now. Before resting, you press your feet together, once then relax them. You listen for the fire. You count 3 slow breaths. Only then do you let your eyes close. Each time you repeat this, your body settles more quickly, as if it recognizes the sequence. There is a quiet comfort in repetition. It gives the mind something predictable to hold on to. In storms like this, predictability is rare and valuable. Some families pass these habits down without comment. Children learn them simply by watching. Years later, people recalled doing the same things without remembering when or why they started. Memory blurred the origin, but the behavior remained. You feel a hand nearby move fingers brushing fabric, then stillness again. Someone else has their own rituals unfolding in the dark. The room hums softly with these parallel patterns unseen but present. The storm shifts outside, wind rising briefly, then easing. You note the change without alarm. Your body stays calm, grounded by routine. The walls answer back in familiar ways. Nothing sounds wrong. There has never been a clear explanation for why these small rituals eased fear so effectively. Some suggest it was simple distraction. Others believe it reinforced a sense of control during uncontrollable events. Perhaps both are true. What matters is that it works. You repeat your sequence once more, slower this time. Feet together. Fire sound checked. 3 breaths. The effect is immediate. Muscles soften, jaw loosens. Warmth settles evenly through your core. Sleep deepens slightly, not enough to pull you under completely, but enough to rest your mind. When you wake again, it is gentle without jolt or panic. You repeat the ritual without thinking, and rest returns just as smoothly. The night stretches on, but it feels manageable now. Ritual has carved a narrow path through it, one that carries you forward quietly, step by step, breath by breath, until even the storm feels like something you can coexist with rather than fight. At some point you find yourself listening for signs you were taught long before tonight. Not rules, exactly more like weather wisdom passed hand to hand, learned through watching skies and animals and wind patterns over many seasons. You remember how people spoke about storms as if they had personalities, how some blizzards rushed through loud and fast while others settled in with patience, staying long after they arrived. This one feels like the second kind. It has chosen its place and intends to remain until it finishes whatever work it came to do. You listen for changes that matter. A sudden rise in wind that might mean a shift in direction. A drop into heavy silence that could mean snowfall has thickened enough to block sound. These signals once guided decisions about when to move, when to wait, when to dig. Tonight they guide only one thing: how deeply you allow yourself to rest. People on the plains relied on these observations because formal forecasts did not exist. Experience served as prediction. Someone always knew how the sky had looked earlier. Someone remembered what similar winds had done before. That shared memory shaped choices more reliably than guesswork. You notice that the wind no longer lifts sharply. It presses and releases in long, heavy waves. Snow must be deep now, reshaping the land into something smoother and quieter. That usually meant the worst of the storm had passed, even if the cold lingered. You hold that thought gently, not as hope, but as information. There was a small belief in some households that storms announced their turning point with sound rather than light. People said you could hear when a blizzard began to tire. Not stop, just tire. The wind lost its edge. Snow fell more straight than sideways. Whether this was true or simply comfort is hard to say, but you find yourself listening for it all the same. You become aware that your body feels less tense than earlier. Not warm exactly, but stable. Cold no longer feels like an active threat. It feels like an environment you're managing. That shift matters. You adjust your position, slightly mindful of others. The shared warmth holds. The wall behind you remains steady. The fire glows faintly, but reliably. Animals nearby are quiet, settled into their own patience. These are all signs you have learned to read. Accounts from long winters often conflict on how reliable folk weather knowledge truly was. Some people swore by it, others admitted it failed them often. The truth likely depended on the storm and the listener. Tonight it gives you just enough confidence to rest more deeply. Your breathing slows without effort now. You no longer count, you no longer correct. The rhythm has found itself. In, out, even. Warmth stays where it should. You allow sleep to stretch a little longer between waking moments. When you surface, it is not with urgency, but with curiosity. You listen again. The storm is still there, but it feels contained, predictable. Weather wisdom does not promise safety. It promises understanding, and understanding allows rest. You settle back into the bedding, trusting what your senses tell you. The storm will finish when it finishes. Until then, you remain here steady, warm enough breathing, slowly letting experience carry you through the night. Children sleep differently in a storm like this. You notice it even without opening your eyes fully. Their breathing is lighter, quicker to change. They stir more often, reacting to sounds adults have learned to ignore. Keeping them warm and calm becomes its own quiet task layered into the night. Someone rises carefully, stepping with practiced softness across the floor. The boards barely creak. A blanket is adjusted over smaller shoulders, a hat pulled lower. A hand rests briefly on a child's back, feeling for steady breath. These actions are gentle, unhurried, and repeated as needed. People who raised families on the frontier understood that children lost heat faster. Smaller bodies cooled quickly. Extra layers were not optional. Many parents recalled sleeping with children tucked close, arranged like pieces in a puzzle, so warmth could be shared without suffocation or panic. You hear a child murmur, half dreaming, half waking, a soft question barely formed. It is answered with a whisper, not words so much as sound, a reassurance carried by tone rather than meaning. The child settles again. There was a quiet understanding that fear spread faster among the young. If they sensed panic in adults, it magnified their own. Calm was modelled deliberately. Even exhaustion did not excuse sharp voices. Nights like this taught patience, whether anyone wanted to learn it or not. You remember stories of children who survived storms by being kept awake through the worst hours, talked to, sung to, or gently shaken when sleep grew too deep. Other memories describe children sleeping through entire blizzards, protected by layers and watchful adults. These accounts do not line up neatly. Experience varied by family and circumstance. The fire flares briefly as someone adds a small piece of wood, then settles again. The added warmth spreads low and slow, just enough to ease the chill near the floor where children sleep. You shift slightly, making space without breaking warmth. The room feels full now, not crowded but complete. Every body accounted for, every breath part of the shared rhythm. Outside, the storm presses on, indifferent to age or size. Inside, attention bends toward the smallest, the most vulnerable. This focus shapes the night. Adults accept discomfort willingly if it means steadier rest for the young. You feel a quiet pride in that, even if you do not name it. Survival here is not just personal, it is collective. It reaches forward, protecting those who will remember this night only as fragments or not at all. Sleep deepens again once the children settle. The room grows still. The only movement comes from breath and the faint pulse of fire. You let yourself rest, trusting that watchful care will continue to circle through the night as needed. Sleep changes its shape now. It no longer arrives as something you fall into. Instead, it breaks itself into careful pieces, offered in short stretches that feel earned rather than automatic. You drift for a while, then surface gently aware, without alarm. Then drift again. This rhythm becomes familiar, almost comforting in its predictability. People who lived through winters like this rarely expected a full night of uninterrupted rest. They adjusted their expectations early. Sleep was taken when it was safe, not when the clock suggested it should be. Waking was not failure, it was maintenance. You notice how your body has learned this without instruction. When sleep grows too deep, something pulls you back. A shift in temperature, a change in sound, a subtle discomfort in a limb that needs repositioning. You wake just enough to correct it, then allow rest to return. The fire continues its low glow, steady and restrained. It no longer demands attention every few minutes. Someone has learned its rhythm well enough to trust it for longer stretches. That trust allows everyone else to rest more fully, even if no one says thank you out loud. You surface again and listen. The wind has softened further. Snow still falls, but more quietly now, straight down instead of sideways. The pressure against the walls feels even settled. The storm is still present, but it has lost some of its urgency. A few people later recalled that this was the most dangerous part of the night. When conditions seemed calmer, vigilance could slip. Others remembered it as the moment when survival finally felt assured. These memories do not agree, and perhaps they never will. You feel cautious relief holding both possibilities at once. You adjust your position again, minimal movement, practiced and slow. Your body remembers where warmth gathers and where it escapes. You keep your core protected, extremities tucked, breath steady. Time becomes difficult to measure. Without clear markers, minutes stretch and compress. You might sleep for 10 minutes or an hour, and it feels the same. You stop trying to keep track. The night will end when it ends. Someone nearby wakes briefly and checks the fire, then returns without comment. The room accepts this interruption without breaking its rhythm. Shared sleep like this is flexible, built to absorb small movements without unraveling. You drift again, deeper this time. Dreams brush the edges of your mind, faint and unfinished. Images of warmth, sunlight filtered through dust. Familiar places far from snow. They come and go without pulling you fully away. When you wake again, it is calm. No jolt, no fear. Just awareness returning smoothly. Everything that should be steady remains so. You allow yourself to rest once more, trusting this pattern of broken sleep to carry you through the remaining hours. It is not luxurious, it is effective, and tonight that is enough. You wake to darkness that feels heavier than before, and for a moment you think the night has started over. Then you realize what has changed. The storm has quieted in a way that feels deliberate, not finished, just settled. The wind no longer surges in wild bursts. It moves slowly now, weighted as if carrying the exhaustion of hours, spent pushing against land and shelter. This is often when people made mistakes. Calm could be misleading. Many who lived through long blizzards later spoke about the false promise of quiet. Silence did not always mean safety. Sometimes it meant snow had piled high enough to muffle sound completely. You keep that in mind as you lie still and listen. The room feels colder at the edges, warmer at the centre. Heat has retreated inward, concentrating where bodies and fire still hold it. You test the air with a slow breath and notice how it sits in your chest. Cool but not sharp. Manageable. Someone rises again, more carefully, this time moving toward the door. You hear the soft scrape of fabric, the pause, the faint press of a hand against wood. They do not open it. No one would. Opening the door now would invite the storm inside. Instead, they listen, pressing an ear, close feeling vibration rather than sound. People learned this habit quickly, checking the outside without exposing the inside. You can tell a lot from pressure, from how the door answers back. Heavy resistance usually meant deep drifts. Light movement meant wind still had room to work. The person returns to their place without speaking. The message travels anyway. Whatever is happening outside can wait. You shift again, preparing for movement that will come soon enough. Morning is not far now, even if the light does not show it yet. When it does come, it will not arrive gently. It will demand work, digging, clearing, checking animals, assessing damage. Sleep now is preparation. Your muscles feel heavy, but capable. Stiffness has settled in, but not weakness. You flex fingers and toes, slowly reminding them they will be needed. Cold has a way of convincing the body to stay still longer than it should. You resist that, gently keeping circulation alive. There are stories from this period describing people waking to discover doors, completely buried windows, sealed from the outside smoke holes, blocked by snow. Some found themselves effectively underground. Others emerged to landscapes, unrecognizable fences gone, paths erased. These accounts vary in detail, but they agree on one thing. Morning after a storm was never ordinary. You let that knowledge sit without letting it grow heavy. You will deal with what waits outside when you can see it. For now, the night still belongs to rest. The fire glows faintly, barely more than embers now, but it has done its job. The room holds, bodies remain warm enough, breath remains steady. You settle again, aware that sleep will soon give way to waking for good. You do not rush it. These last moments of rest are valuable. They gather strength quietly without drama. The storm waits. So do you. Calm, prepared, breathing slowly, letting the final stretch of night pass in steady quiet before the work of morning begins. When movement finally becomes necessary, it does not feel like waking. It feels like transitioning. Your body has been preparing for this moment for hours, even while resting. Muscles wake slowly, reluctantly, carrying the stiffness of cold and stillness together. You stretch without extending, fully careful not to expose warmth too quickly. The room is quieter now than it has been all night. Not silent, but muted, wrapped in snow, thick enough to soften everything. The storm has not ended. It has simply settled into itself. You recognize this stage, the kind of calm that follows long effort. Someone near you sits up, testing balance before committing weight to the floor. You hear a soft exhale as boots meet cold boards. Others follow one at a time, moving carefully, so the warmth you have built does not vanish all at once. No one rushes. Rushing wastes energy. You push yourself upright and pause there, letting blood move where it needs to. Dizziness passes quickly. You pull your hat lower scarf tighter. Fingers flex. Toes curl inside boots that are stiff but wearable. Everything feels usable. and that matters. Digging will come soon. You already know that. Snow does not move itself out of the way. Shovels wait near the door handles, cold to the touch. Someone brushes frost from a metal blade with a gloved hand. The sound is sharp in the quiet. Before anyone opens the door, there is a pause, a shared understanding that once it opens, the outside will enter fully. Cold air, light, snow pressed hard against wood. You prepare for that shock by pulling layers closer, sealing gaps, lowering your chin. People who lived through storms like this learned that the first opening mattered. Doors could stick, snow could rush in, hinges could snap if forced too quickly. Many accounts describe careful digging from the inside, removing pressure, before committing to opening fully. That patience saved fingers and doors alike. The first push meets resistance, solid packed. Snow has climbed high, heavy with wind and time. You feel it through the wood, dense and unyielding. Shovels go to work from inside, scooping and levering as much as space allows. Snow spills inward, in small avalanches, bright and startling against the dark floor. Cold air follows sharp and immediate. It rushes across your face and hands, carrying the clean, biting scent of open winter. You breathe it in carefully, not too deep. This is not the cold of the night. This is the cold of exposure. Light finally enters, pale and diffuse, filtered through cloud and snow. It does not look like morning. It looks like a world paused mid-breath. You blink against it, letting eyes adjust slowly. Outside, the landscape is unrecognizable. Fences are gone, paths erased, familiar shapes reduced to smooth white forms. Snow reaches high on walls, reshaping the shelter into something smaller and heavier. People later describe this moment with mixed feeling: relief at having survived, apprehension at the work ahead, or at how completely the land had been rewritten. Standing here now, you feel all of it at once. Animals stir nearby, breath steaming heavily. They survived too. That knowledge steadies you. The night did its worst and you're still here. You step forward carefully, weight tested with each movement. The day will demand effort soon enough. For now, you take in the quiet aftermath, knowing the hardest part of the night has passed. Once you step fully outside, the scale of what happened settles in slowly. Snow reaches places it never should. Fence posts disappear halfway up. Drifts lean against walls like frozen waves shaped by wind that has long since moved on. The air feels still heavy with cold that no longer rushes but lingers. You pause, letting your eyes adjust. Everything is brighter than expected light, bouncing off endless white, making distance hard to judge. A few steps away could be a foot or a yard. You move carefully, planting each boot before committing your weight. The snow resists, packed hard in some places, loose and deceptive in others. People who lived through blizzards like this often spoke about the strange silence afterward. Not peaceful exactly, more like the land holding its breath. Sound travels differently now. A shovel scraping snow rings out sharply. A voice carries farther than it should. Even your own breathing sounds loud inside your ears. Work begins almost immediately, but it is not rushed. Digging is methodical. Paths first, doorways widened, animals checked before anything else. Survival after the storm depends on restoring movement, even in small ways. Clearing a narrow trench can mean the difference between isolation and connection. You join in shovel, biting into snow with a dull crunch. The rhythm warms you quickly. Muscles complain at first, stiff from the night, then loosen as blood moves. Steam rises from your breath, thick and constant now. This warmth feels earned different from the careful heat of the night. As you work, you notice how the storm has sculpted everything. Wind carved sharp edges on one side of drifts and left gentle slopes on the other. Snow piled where it met resistance, revealing invisible currents that shaped the night. People who spent years out here learned to read these shapes like maps, understanding which way the wind had travelled and how long it had stayed. There are stories of settlers finding themselves completely surrounded after storms, unable to see neighbouring homes even when they stood close by. Others remembered digging for hours just to locate a barn roof. These memories vary in detail, but they agree on one thing: storms here did not simply pass through, they rearranged the world. You uncover familiar landmarks slowly. A fence rail emerges, a gate hinge, signs that the place you knew still exists beneath the snow. Each discovery feels grounding, like finding pieces of yourself scattered and then returned. The cold remains intense, but it feels different now. Movement changes everything. Blood flows, muscles work, heat builds from effort rather than protection. You pull off a glove briefly to adjust your grip, then replace it quickly, respecting how fast exposure still punishes carelessness. Animals respond as well. Horses shift and snort, stamping snow free from hooves. Cattle cluster breath, rising in thick clouds. Their survival mirrors your own effort. Night was endurance. Morning is labour. You stop occasionally, straightening, slowly scanning the landscape. The sky remains pale and distant clouds, hanging low, unwilling to promise clear weather yet. You accept that. Today will be about recovery, not progress. The night has passed, but its influence remains everywhere. In the weight of snow, in the stiffness of your body, in the quiet determination that shapes every movement. You continue digging, steady and deliberate, rebuilding a sense of order, one shovel at a time. As the work continues, you begin to understand how nights like this reshape the West itself. Not through single dramatic moments, but through accumulation. Each storm adjusted habits. Each winter rewrote expectations. People did not just survive these blizzards, they adapted around them. You notice it in the way everyone moves now. Efficient, economical, no wasted steps. Tools are placed carefully, never set down, where they might vanish under drifting snow. Paths are cleared with intention, angled to account for where the wind will likely return. Even the way people speak has changed since last night. Fewer words, more meaning. Settlers who endured repeated winters learned quickly which building styles held and which failed. Some abandoned tall structures in favour of lower profiles that caught less wind. Others dug deeper into the earth, letting soil do what wood could not. Over time, entire communities adjusted their architecture and layout because of nights like this one. You feel the weight of that knowledge now, not as theory, but as muscle memory, forming in real time. You clear snow from the side of the shelter that faced the worst wind, recognizing that it will drift again there first. You stack it where it will least interfere with movement. This is not instinct, it is learning happening quietly. Someone mentions a storm from years back, worse than this one, measured not by temperature, but by loss. The comment is brief, factual. No one presses for detail. The past is referenced only when it helps explain a decision in the present. You notice how the land itself seems changed, not just covered. Snow has filled low spots, flattened hills, erased subtle boundaries. Travel will be slower now. Routes altered, distances longer. The storm did not leave things as it found them. People later looking back sometimes argued about whether these blizzards were truly common or just remembered more vividly because of their impact. Records do not always agree. But standing here surrounded by evidence pressed into the ground, the argument feels distant. What matters is that they happened often enough to shape lives. The sun remains hidden, light diffused and cold, No warmth comes from it yet. Still, its presence marks progress. Time is moving forward again. That matters more than temperature. As the day settles into work, the memory of the night begins to soften. Not fade, but integrate. It becomes part of the larger rhythm of living here. Preparation, endurance, recovery, repeat. You pause, leaning on your shovel, breath steady, body warm from effort. You look back at the shelter that held through the storm. It looks smaller now, half buried but strong. You feel a quiet gratitude for it, for the choices made before the storm ever arrived. Nights like this did not just test individuals. They filtered who stayed, who left, and how the land would be lived on in the years that followed. You return to work with that understanding, knowing that survival here is never just about one night, but about learning what that night teaches you. Warmth returns slowly, almost reluctantly, as the day settles into its work. It does not arrive as comfort at first, but as function. Muscles move more freely, fingers lose their stiffness, breath no longer fogs quite as thickly with every exhale. These changes are small, but they matter. You notice how tired you are only now that the danger has passed. During the night, alertness held you upright. With daylight, exhaustion makes itself known. It sits in your shoulders, your lower back, your legs. You do not fight it. You pace yourself, knowing that overexertion after a storm can be as dangerous as cold itself. People who lived through winters like this learn to respect the aftershock. The storm was not finished just because the wind eased. Injuries, illness, and mistakes often followed hard nights when people pushed too fast. Recovery was part of survival, even if it felt unproductive. You take breaks when needed, standing still for a moment, letting breath and heart rate settle. Steam rises gently from your clothing. The cold no longer feels predatory. It feels present, manageable. The shelter behind you bears its scars. Snow packed high against one wall, ice crusted along the eaves. A door that will need work before the next storm. You make mental notes. Repairs wait for clearer weather, but awareness begins now. Animals settle into routine again. They feed, they shift, they respond to your presence with familiar sounds. That normalcy is grounding. Life continues altered, but intact. As the hours pass, the night recedes further into memory. Not erased, just folded into experience. It becomes something you carry forward, shaping how you prepare, how you sleep, how you listen to wind in the future. You feel a quiet satisfaction that does not need celebration. You endured, you adapted, you paid attention. Those are the skills that mattered here. As the light drifts across the snow and the day finds its rhythm, you slow your movements, conserving energy, letting the body recover fully. There will be more work tomorrow. There will be more storms another year, but this one is finished. You breathe deeply, feeling warmth hold without effort now, and allow the night to finally release its grip. Now everything begins to soften. The work pauses, the sounds thin out. Wind fades into the background, no longer demanding your attention. Your body remembers how to rest without guarding every breath. Muscles loosen naturally. Thoughts stretch and slow. You are warm enough, safe enough. The storm has moved on, leaving behind quiet, pale light, and a landscape at rest. The shelter stands. The fire will be rebuilt later. For now, nothing needs doing. You let your breathing deepen, uncounted and uncorrected, in and out, even, gentle. Each breath feels unhurried, carrying away the last tension the night left behind. Sleep no longer feels like something you must negotiate with. It simply arrives steady and calm, like snow falling without wind. You allow yourself to sink into it fully this time, trusting that the world around you has settled. That morning has claimed its place. that nothing is pressing at the walls anymore. The night is finished. Rest now. Sweet dreams.